Hey, Derek Sheridan from Rust Belt Basketball Coaches Network. Thank you so much for joining us on this Sunday and taking time away from your NFL team, especially if you live in the Rust Belt, where damn near all of our NFL teams are playing now. And also, there's some awfully good college basketball games on both the men's and women's side today. So, thank you for joining us. I'm stoked. We got Coach Adam Patai. Adam and I coached against each other and developed one of the strongest friendships I've had on my time on the earth with Coach Patai when we both coached in the Northwest Indiana Calumet region. So this is going to be a great time for us to learn about Coach Patai's time with Coach Meyer and his journey through coaching, as Coach Patai now is teaching English classes and coaching in Las Vegas. Today's sponsor is Danny's Cafe from Rossford, Ohio. If you are in the Northwest Ohio, Great Lakes area, especially if you're here on a Friday or a Saturday, for even now, we have a lot of our high school. Patrick Henry is still in the playoffs. Liberty Center is still in the playoffs. We have a lot of schools who are still in the playoffs, and basketball season is just around the corner. Stop by Danny's because they have just as many of the high school games on their flat screens as they do collegiate or pro. And most of the people in Danny's Cafe are there to watch the high school games, which I think is outstanding. And if you want to stop by for a Notre Dame or a Michigan or Ohio State football game, it'll be an experience for you, because the only facility I have ever been in with more flat screen TVs than Danny's is Costco. So it's a great experience. Great food, great employees. The waitresses hustle. They're fun people. Brad, the owner, Brad Morrison, usually makes his rounds. It's a great experience, great food, great experience, especially if you're a sports fan. So Adam Patai is here with us today on this beautiful Sunday afternoon. And Adam was very fortunate in the fact that he's been able to spend time with some of the best basketball coaches anywhere in the college and high school game. Coach Patai got to spend a lot of time while he was at the University of Indiana with Coach Knight. He's been able to spend a lot of time as he was on Don Meyer's staff at David Lipscomb. And his high school coach, Jack Gabor, is regarded as one of the best high school basketball coaches, not just in Northwest Indiana, but by and large, the state of Indiana. And as a baseball coach, Coach Gabor is the only coach, to my knowledge, who has taken a team to the Final Four in both baseball and basketball in the same school year. So this is going to be a great experience for everybody. And I want to turn it loose right now to Coach Adam Patai. Adam, thank you for joining us this Sunday afternoon. And I'm going to make this as open forum as I can. So I want you to tell us about your journey, about your time with all of these great coaches that we aforementioned. And the mic's yours, my man.
Well, Coach, thanks for having me. It's good to see you. It's been a little while since I moved out to Las Vegas. You know, it's a little hard to communicate all the time. But as you said, I played for a great high school coach, Coach Gabor. Was a grad assistant for Knight. So I wasn't a great player in high school. So, if I was going to be on the team, it was, I got to hustle, I got to learn, I got to know my role and do what I'm supposed to. And when I graduated high school, I went to Purdue Calumet, and Coach Gabor needed, he said, hey, you want to make some extra money? I got some freshmen that are struggling academically. I know you want to be a teacher, you want to come back and tutor. So I started tutoring the kids. And then he said, hey, you want to come out and help coach? And I started doing that as a freshman coach and helped out with the varsity a little bit, and just, fell in love with it, especially seeing those kids get eligible. And, that's kind of where we started. And Coach Gabor was a great coach, and I learned so much from him. And so then I started going to clinics, and I remember I drove down to Indianapolis. There was a clinic on the Sunday of the clinic, last day. Most people have gone home. Don Meyer is the last speaker of the day, and I'm 18, 19 years old, and I'm like, who's Don Meyer? This guy can't teach me anything. I saw John Calipari last night, or whoever. And so I'm like, well, I'll stick around. I paid, I drove down, I'm going to make the most of it. So I go, and it was just like one of this eye-opening experiences. Just how he talked about the game, talked about like, not just like, because every coach gets up there in a clinic and starts doing set plays and this and that. And he talked about your philosophy of coaching and, coaching your coaches. And he said, hey, we run a summer camp. It's huge every summer. You want to come down and work it, let us know. So I ended up going to work camp down there, and we'd have, 8 weeks of camp, have 4,000 kids. And the things they did in camp were, working on the fundamentals. We did like, taught the start, stops, and turns is what he called it, but it was like John Wooden's line fundamental drill. And that's what he did with the college team. And so I just started working it enough to where, after I graduated, things worked out. I was able to work for him. And, Coach Meyer was just so laser focused on the game of basketball. Like when he always wanted like a 10-minute period at the end of practice where he could experiment with stuff. He just wanted, it might not even be anything we were going to run, but he went to a clinic or had an idea and he wanted to play with it. And one of the assistants got him a hat, KISS, keep it simple, stupid, because that's all he thought about. And it was about the thing that really struck me about him was just how simple he tried to make the game, make it simple and easy to learn. And so we worked on basic fundamentals and, easy to execute, but, his big thing was don't teach them plays, teach kids how to play. And that's, and I coming into that, I was a little cocky because, 18, 19 years old, I was working for Jack Gabor. Man, I know this stuff. I'm going to be a coach. And once I went down there and started working camp, I realized just how much I didn't know. And that's the thing. Like it was how organized and laser focused he was with teaching the game. And that's the thing I learned. And a lot of other coaches I maybe are friends with or have worked for, it's long blocks of time where it's 5-on-5 and but Coach Meyer organized it like 30 minutes fundamentals. We would do line fundamentals. We would do passing drills, defensive slides. We worked on our footwork every day. Then it might be 30 minutes of team defensive breakdown and, guarding screens or whatever skills you're going to work on. And then it was 30 minutes of your team offense, and then 30 minutes of 5-on-5 running situations, and tried to adopt that method. And I feel like teams, maybe you weren't a finished product at the beginning of the year, but through the course of the year, you were going to get better and better because you're working on those skills and, you mastered them, and then we move on to something, build on it. And I know coaches that they really focus hard on fundamentals in the preseason. And then once the season starts, it's like, we got to get all our stuff in. And for Coach Meyer, it was like, we're going to build, we're going to add as the year goes on when we're ready. And I thought that really got his teams ready to play at the end of the year. You kind of peaked at the right time.
Yeah, I agree 100%. I was a huge, still, I shouldn't say was, I am a huge Don Meyer disciple. I followed him all over the country, listened to clinics. And I can remember when you and I were both teaching and coaching in the Calumet region, Northwest Indiana. And for those of you who are not from the Rust Belt. The Calumet region is the far northwest corner of the state of Indiana. So we are basically 7 miles south of the old Comiskey baseball stadium where the Chicago White Sox used to play. So Adam and I think this is something my wife and I couldn't remember. I think it was you and I and Doug McAllister rode down to where I grew up, drove over to Greentown, we went straight to Taylor University to the Don Meyer, Paul Patterson Clinic, stayed the night, went back to the clinic the next day, and then went back to the region from there. It was you and I and McAllister, or just you and I can't remember.
Yeah, that was a long time ago. I remember Paul Patterson. There's another coach, not well known, but just one of the best.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So you introduced me to Coach Meyer and one of his assistants, and we had a break, and that's back when a lot of people still smoked cigarettes. So we had a break, and most of the coaches are outside of the doorway at Taylor burning one, and you and I are looking at Coach Meyer's table, and it's full of his notebooks and his videos he has for sale, whatever. And I think at that period of time I had darn near all of them, but you tapped me on the shoulder, and I looked up because you and I were sitting at the top of the gym at Taylor, and Coach Meyer was going through my briefcase. And he pulled that binder I had out. He's going through it. And anyway, the clinic resumes, and Coach Meyer says, "I'd like the person who owns that Nike briefcase or attaché bag to stand up." And I'm like, oh my gosh. So I stood up, and he said, "That binder you have, the coaches in Tennessee don't have those types of things. With your special situations, they're like tabbed off." And I'm thinking, well, I stole it all from Adam, and Coach Gabor and these other great coaches up there. But Coach Meyer, what I'm getting at is Coach Meyer was the type of character with that personality and that passion for the game, which we need in the worst way now. We don't have that kind of person who might not be coaching at a big, quote unquote, big time program, but yet every high school coach who approaches the game of basketball with the Rust Belt thing, this ain't a hobby. This ain't a hobby. Knew who Don Myers was, and not only knew Don Myers, but knew a lot about him, and he had affected our lives a lot in the way we coached. And I'm hoping you can help me out. I can't think of anybody right now who holds that power and that passion to help coaches. Can you think of anybody?
I can't, and that was like Coach Meyer's thing. He wanted to give back to the game and build it up. Like, he thought coaches were so important. And like one of his goals was he wanted to win. Like, he won 900 some games. He wanted to win 1,000 because he thought, even though he wasn't at a big time school, he thought 1,000 would be enough to where he could do clinics the rest of his life. Because after he retired from coaching, that's all he wanted to do was give back to the game. And I don't know if there are coaches I know that will do clinics and things like that, but I don't think any of them are trying to develop coaches like that.
Yeah, and I think there are some coaches who maybe, if they would dedicate themselves to it, have the power to do it. I know Scott Davenport from Bellarmine is probably, if he's not on this podcast, he will have it. And Scott's probably going to find a virtual way to castrate me for saying this, but I wish Scott Davenport at Bellarmine was 40 years old or 35 years old, because I think Scott, looking back at the things that are happening now in the game, would be that guy. He has a big personality like Coach Meyer. He's got that Coach Meyer, Rick Majerus-esque ability to see someone they might have talked to 20 years ago and remember their name. They remember their kids' names. They remember the name of the school they teach and coach at. which was something that Don Meyer, Bob Knight, Paul Patterson, Steve Platt, Dick Bennett, these guys, and forget about style of play. I'm talking about these guys had a burning passion for the education of basketball coaches, a burning passion. And one of the talents that they have or had was once you introduced yourself to them, everything around them ceased to exist. They narrowed their focus on you and asked a lot of really great questions. And then they put that in their memory bank. And I'm racking my brain still. And I was watching the Bears game earlier over here at the bowling alley in Bowling Green with some coaches, Maumee coaches from various sports. And we can't think of anybody right now in today's game who has that burning passion for, as you've said, giving back to the game and developing basketball coaches. And something that you said, Adam, and I really believe this, you and I were in the tail end of this phase in the state of Indiana, where the head basketball coach was a vital position in the community and at the school. Our kids were not supposed to act like teacher killers. We were supposed to represent our, school, all those things, but it was basically an administrative job.
Yeah, a lot of ways.
And Don Meyer understood, and not just Indiana, by and large everywhere, the importance that a basketball coach is to the community. And shoot, I know the area I live in, unless you're at a school outside of the city, where athletics are still highly valued. But here in the cities, I'm not so sure it is.
Yeah, in Indiana, I know it was very important. You were a head basketball coach. That carried a lot of weight. Here in Las Vegas, high school sports is very different out here. They want to get as many kids playing at sports, but the seasons are like, all right, let's get started. Let's end it. Let's get to the next one. And, a lot of these high schools are fairly new. I'm at a high school that's just over a little more than 30 years old. And so it's kind of in that middle tier. And so you don't have the alumni base or even it's a very transient city too. So people moving in and out. So you do have a following, but it's there's a lot of times there's very few people in the gym at some, especially if it's a Wednesday night game. And I'm curious to how it is back in Indiana. I like to have the stereotypical view of Indiana, Hoosiers, or the whole town, gets behind the team. And I hope it's still like that, but I know times have changed,
It has. My nephew, my matter of fact, when we stayed at my parents' house, my little sister, who's 11 years younger than I, was still in high school, if that dates us. But for the love of God, before I move on, you haven't aged a bit. My God, you look the exact same you did when you were in your 20s and 30s. Anyway, my niece, or my niece, my sister's 3 children are all very good athletes. And they go to Eastern Greentown, where I went. Reed is the point guard, and is also fantastic at tennis, and is a gifted singer in the choir. I mean, he's just got a set of pipes on him that an Irish young lad should have. And Sophie has already lettered in golf and had a hole-in-one as a freshman.
Oh, wow.
They had a great golf season. And Tessa is just now in first grade, and she's really involved in gymnastics. But anyway, my point in saying all that is I get to stay in touch with the game through Reed, my nephew. And I think from what I've been able to see in last year at the IBCA clinic, Adam, it was I took some Northwest Ohio coaches with me, and I was embarrassed at how small the turnout was. And then watching Reed's junior high games, of course, I guess what I'm saying is I think it's a microcosm of what we've already talked about before we started rolling tape here. Is it's a community that's less than 10,000 people, and all the communities around them are on the same league, and there's a bitter rivalry. The parents hate the others, whatever. So yeah, in that area, it's still the same. But I don't know what it's like in the cities. I know my dad says he really jumped on the Kokomo High School bandwagon. They've got the kid who just signed with Kansas, so he was paying $3 to watch the games on his computer via the NFHS, and he said it just didn't look like there was anybody in there, whether they were on the road. So they go to play Noblesville, which, that used to be you have to show up before the JV game starts, so you're not going to be able to park in the parking lot. And he said, heck, at Noblesville, there wasn't anybody there. So I did a little research, and I don't know what it's like out in Vegas, but here, where you and I grew up, a kid can go to McDonald's and make $17 an hour. Well, that's not the way McDonald's was supposed to operate. That wasn't supposed to be a full-time job, but my point is that kids are in a really unique time period where they can go to a McDonald's and make quite a bit of money with a $200 signing bonus, and then they stay for that amount of time that was required to get that signing bonus, and then they jump over to Arby's and get another 200 signing bonus, and so they're in charge of paying for their car's insurance, their car payments, going out on dates, all the things that high school kids do. And when you and I were kids, if you were a varsity athlete, that was your job.
Yeah,
that was your job. And so it's all changed. And through the small amount of research I did in the states of Missouri, Kansas, Indiana, Illinois, and for the people who might not be from this area, high school basketball in Indiana, Ohio, Iowa, Michigan, and Minnesota, and more so now Kentucky, is a religion. And football has gotten much more popular in Indiana because of the inside of the Colts. Because when you and I were coaching there, the Colts had just became a thing, right? Everybody prior to that was a Bears fan. So I think just the importance of high school athletics to a high school kid's self-efficacy, I think maybe has been diminished by all the other avenues they have to make some money.
Yeah, I know. Especially I've noticed right after COVID, I started coaching again. I stopped for a little while. My daughter was born 16 years ago. I started doing lessons, and I started coaching my son and daughter in youth league. My daughter has continued to play. My son has gone into golf. He enjoys that. And so my daughter was playing up, and she was in, like, they have a couple. There's a league out here called GYB. It's girls youth basketball, great league. She played in that. She played with her school team in seventh grade. She had a really good year, and COVID hit, so she doesn't get to play that year. And so she's a freshman, and she's going to play in high school, and she has a good year. It's hard for her to play for her dad sometimes, because she feels like my expectations might be up here. And I'm like, I just want you to be a competent high school player and have fun and enjoy it. And so I was helping out with the lower levels in her team. And then the varsity coach had asked me to come up and help him, because, I had some experience. And the enthusiasm, we had some girls not come out from the previous year. I didn't know them because I didn't coach before. they just lost interest. Some of them were like, I don't even know if I want to play this year. And so a lot of them had gotten jobs over COVID. They found other things. And it was just like, sports isn't that important to me anymore. And I know more so in girls athletics, for girls basketball at our school, it's been like that. We don't see the interest or the enthusiasm maybe in prior years.
Yeah,
There's so much competition for their time.
yes, absolutely, 100, and that's the best way I've heard it been put. I'm going to steal that line for you: competition for their time, and that's exactly what it is. I want to ask one more personal question, and we'll get back to Don Meyer in your journey. What you said, your son's now involved in golf.
Yeah.
Well, I love it. I think I just started playing golf when you and I were palling around. And now I've been playing for a long time. And that's a passion I've developed, teaching the game of golf. Now I also do some lessons with basketball, but a lot of kids now are drawn to golf. And there's a similarity there between golf and basketball that a lot of civilians don't get. Basketball was the original game where a kid who didn't have much could practice a game by himself. All he needed was a ball and a hoop, no matter what demographic or where you're at, socially, economically, whatever. It just required a few things. And now with golf, one of the things golf has done that is brilliant is golf is catering now not to the 60-year-old, but to the 6-year-old.
Yeah.
The game of golf is making itself affordable for kids to be able to get on the range and then walk the course and get a hot dog for lunch. But that stereotype of golf only being for the wealthy is gone. It's gone. And my point is, golf has taken this endeavor in getting kids hooked on it in the early ages and given them the hot dog and the lunch, in the pop at lunch, and then all the range balls they can hit, and then giving them a few jobs, go, trim weeds, whatever. And what it's become is threefold. One, it's free babysitting for the parents in the summer. Two, they're around good people. They're around people who care about this golf course and take pride in it. And that, for a young person, whether male, it doesn't matter, is worth its weight in salt in today's environment, in today's society. Being around people who are vested in their endeavor. And the third thing is they are making things available to kids that aren't forcing their parents to open their wallets up. And we have Stone Ridge here in Bowling Green, which is our Bowling Green State University's home course. And we have a great college and high school golf program here in Bowling Green. But my point in saying that is, when they have their youth golf camps, they have to shut our course down. And I'm a member. I can't play on those days. And instead of being bitter about it, whatever, I've jumped in and now I'm helping. And the passion these young kids are having for golf, because all they need is a golf club, a flat surface, and a bag of golf balls, and they can do it by themselves.
Yeah.
And they don't need a team. They don't need other things. And I think golf is leading the way athletically right now in that endeavor, where it used to be, you would see, especially Adam and I both growing up in Indiana, very rarely did you drive past a neighborhood and not see a basketball game. Kids out playing at a hoop. And we still live in an area where we do see that. But my point is, this last year was the first year that Bowling Green had more kids at golf camp than they did basketball camp.
Yeah, that's amazing. And that's here, like in Las Vegas, you're not, you can the HOAs, homeowner associations, don't allow basketball rims in your front yard, so you don't see them anywhere. But the local golf courses, you know, dirt cheap for kids. I'll take my son down there. I don't play. I'm trying to learn. It's a hard game to learn. But they'll give him a huge discount on balls if he's going to the range. If we come later in the day, they'll let him play a couple holes for free, you know, and if, as long as it's not real busy. But they really cater to the junior golf student, you know, and it's nice because it is, like you say, it is encouraging kids to play at that grassroots level.
Right. And here's what I liken it to, Adam. When you and I were coaching in Indiana, soccer wasn't a thing. You know, your best male athletes played football in the fall. And as that changed over time, now we have the first bastion of American young adults who have children who were in that first wave of what we just said with golf, but it was with soccer. And now soccer is, I can't speak for Indiana, but here in Northwest Ohio, and of course, if you ask anybody who has at least 30% of their teeth who live in the Rust Belt, what is Ohio known for? High school football. And they're exactly right. It's outstanding. It is an unreal state for football. It's unreal. The high school football here is tremendous, but soccer now, we have some schools who are losing football kids to soccer. And it's because of the push they made for young kids 25, 26 years ago. And I think with the direction golf is going, and we have Bowling Green Country Club and Stone Ridge here within 5 minutes of my house, both directions. The one thing they both have in common are the putting greens are packed full of 10-year-olds.
Yeah.
And they're not like Judge Smale's son in Caddyshack. They're like putting with devices I don't understand to make their putting stroke more fluid, whatever. But yeah, it's been fascinating to watch golf expand to where it is now. So getting back to Coach Meyer, what was he like working for on a day-to-day basis?
Well, you know, you talk about like him going through your notebook and briefcase. He liked to see how people kept things organized. He had two of the huge, like Franklin Day planners, two of them. And he was a meticulous planner. And, you know, sitting in the basketball office, he's, you know, thinking about basketball. How can we get better? What are some things we can do that will simulate what we're going to do in a game, and just different ways to engage the players in practice. And, you know, he had a routine we did every day in practice. You know, the first 30 minutes, we're probably going to hit these drills, and the next 30, it's these drills. But he also liked to improvise a little bit, because he always thought there had to be a better way to teach it. And, you know, and that's what he encouraged us to look at. And we were watching film, but it was like, you know, and the thing about Coach Meyer, he made a lot of money from his basketball camps, from his tapes, but you never knew it looking at him. You know, he would work camp and he might have the same pair of shorts on he had yesterday that he wiped the ice cream off his hand on, you know what I mean? Because he could care less about the superficial stuff, you know, what he was wearing. It was like, hey, let's get on the court. Let's work on, you know, and his big thing, you know, he was a big wooden guy, you know, quickly and properly execute the fundamentals of the game for the welfare of the team. That was everywhere. And, you know, he just had this knack for seeing how to teach, like they call them the micro skills now. You know, you got your trainers that are doing stuff, but that's all he thought about. And so it was planning practice. If practice was, 2 hours, he spent at least that amount of time planning it.
Mhm.
It's a nice luxury when that's all you got to do all day, but he was super fixated on being the most efficient coach that he could.
Right. That's great. One of the things you just briefly touched on that's driving me nutso. And there's a local high school here, one of the bigger high schools, who hired a coach without a lot of experience. And he's had to make the other coaches on his staff take pay cuts so they can hire a skills coach. Now, this makes me want to puke, because the process of getting a head coaching job when you and I were pushing 30 years old was a big ordeal. I mean, you had to impress a lot of people.
Yeah.
And you had to know some people, and you had to do all these things, and to boot, you'd had some success, no matter if you were coming from a smaller school or a JV coach, whatever. You'd better had some success, or else you're not even getting an interview. But that's changed now. It's not that difficult, and that's been a hard pill for me to swallow, because I think that has been a massive push in the de-emphasization of high school basketball. But the head coach better be able to teach his kids how to pivot, how to jump stop, how to do all those things, and have a pretty darn good pointed aggression in his teaching as to what he wants to see, or she. I don't understand the philosophy of making the other coaches take a pay cut so we can hire a quote unquote skills coach. To me, if I'm a taxpayer in that community, which I'm not, but if I was, I got an issue with this. If you're not the skills coach, what in the hell do you know?
Yeah, that's Coach Meyer's big thing, was he wanted his program to be, we are a teaching program. That's what he used to always say. And as a coach, you're a teacher, both dealing with high school coaches, you better be a good teacher in the classroom, but, on the floor, yeah, like you need to be teaching the skills to your players. Like that's, if you're not doing, like you say, if you're not doing that, then what are you doing?
Right. And one of the aspects of coaching that I loved, I still have a passion for this, is when you got to hire and one of the highest signs of respect in my pea-sized gym teacher brain is when there was a teaching opening and the upper echelon admin would say, hey, we know you have an opening on your staff. Let's coordinate this teaching position that's open with your open coaching position. To me, that always meant like the administration knew you took your job as a coach, your stipend position, seriously. Yeah. And they had at least digested the fact that you're pretty darn good at what you do. So you've got a big hand in hiring this kid who you like and who's impressed everybody else. And you get to take this kid out for lunch after the final interview and be there when he signs his contract at the board office. And then you get to be the first one to tell him, now my name's attached to you. There's a small piece of my paycheck hanging out of your mouth now. And you're going to have to be awfully good in the classroom, because everybody in this community knows you were hired also to coach. So everybody who had a son, daughter, uncle, cousin who was also interviewed who didn't get that job, now you're public enemy number one. So your performance in the classroom doesn't need to be good. It has to be special. It's got to be outstanding. And whatever happens with you as a coach is all secondary to that. But number one, your performance in your coaching or your teaching job at that high school has to be a performance every day, a well-orchestrated performance. And those kids back then loved it. I mean, that was what they wanted to do, because they saw their high school coaches in a classroom setting, teach their nuts off in what I like to call wow people. They made teaching special. They made learning special. And that was one of the great separators between other jobs, where a basketball coach or a great football coach, whatever sport you coach, if you have the luxury of administering kids in a classroom and touching kids' lives who they don't play basketball or whatever, but yet you educate them as directly and efficiently as you do the kids who play for you, those were the special coaches.
Yeah.
So I got to student teach for Coach Gabor.
Oh, that's right. I'd forgotten.
So his phys ed classes had so much math attached to them, because a lot of people don't realize Jack Gabor is a brilliant mathematician. He can come up with percentages. He's gifted in mathematics. So he included in our bowling unit all of those things. He made them do the math themselves. So his phys ed classes weren't good. They were outstanding. They were outstanding. Our wiffle ball unit, all those things. He got to school early. He had his lesson plans out, and everybody knows that Coach Gabor does not like to get up early. That's everybody. But in Sundays, every Sunday during basketball season, he went into his office at Huntington's, where I got to know him. And the first thing he did there was get Monday's phys ed unit organized. He went and found all the equipment, whatever. And he gave those kids at Huntington North High School a fantastic experience in physical education and in health, because he also taught health. But anyway, I think over the years, at least here, and I'm hoping that you say it's different out west, but here, that kind of person is viewed as more of a threat to the administration than it did used to be. And Coach Meyer talked about this incessantly at clinics, is if you are an outstanding teacher of your discipline, and you also happen to coach, and you also happen to have a lot of success in your coaching, when people hear the name of the school, they say your name first. And that's the first nail in your coffin, because your 27-year-old principal and your 34-year-old superintendent take offense to that. And I can remember sitting around with you after the Taylor Clinic, and we had killed the last of the coffee in the cafeteria at Taylor. And Coach Meyer and Coach Patterson went on a rampage because they weren't happy on how things were going back then in public education. And can you imagine what they would think now?
Yeah. And that was, I think every coach complains about their administration and that, and like, and here in Vegas, it's not, I won't say it's that bad, because you're churning through seasons so much. There's not the fan following, maybe like in some of the schools in Indiana. So you might get like we had a great girls volleyball coach for years, won multiple championships at Green Valley, where I'm at now. And she was synonymous with the Green Valley volleyball program, but not so much, maybe Green Valley, Aaron Hills, Green Valley, but so it's because of the following isn't as big. I think you gain more of that, your reputation more just in kind of consolidated into your sport. But yeah, Coach talked about that a lot. Talked about you got to be a good teacher, because that will save your job a lot of times. If you're a crappy teacher, they can always find a way to get rid of you. And I just remember being a teacher and being a lifelong learner, being a student of the game. Those are the two things he always talked about. If you want to be successful and have some longevity, be a great teacher, be a student of the game. You're always learning, and I've, and growing up, when I was younger coach, going to clinics and all that. And now that I'm older, I'm kind of set in my ways. We have a new girls coach this year, so I'm working for him, and he's excellent. And he runs a dribble drive motion offense, and I'm used to a motion offense, and it's very different. And I've been a little anxious at times, okay, I got to learn this. And so I'm paying attention in our preseason workouts and everything, because and it's been kind of I have a greater enthusiasm now, because I'm learning something new. I'm gonna learn this, and I'm gonna be able to teach it as well as, if not as well as he is, at least where I'm capable of doing it in practice. And I'm asking him questions in practice. Hey, is this the angle we want on this? And and I'm learning all the little details, and it's exciting. And he'll also give me some responsibility, hey, I want you to focus on some of these defensive things that, and so I'm okay, I got a good base there. I can add to it, but it's been fun learning a lot. And I kind of, as we're getting ready for this podcast, of thinking about Coach Meyer and the things I learned from him, but being a teacher, great teacher, and then being a student of the game, and those kind of hit, close to home right now, because I'm kind of going through both of them.
Yeah, I think it's great. I can remember the first time I got to meet Coach Meyer. The first thing he asked me was, "What subject do you teach?" I said, "Physical education and health." He said, "Oh, every kindergartner should be able to do the tennis ball drill while they dribble." And anyway, we had a great conversation. But I played against Coach Patterson. We were in the same league, because I played at Huntington, so I already knew him a little bit. And Coach Patterson and Coach Meyer and Dick Bennett and Dan Peters and these old school guys all dreaded when they found out one of their players had decided to be a teacher, because they knew their senior year they would be in student teaching, which is a draining experience. And it's also one of the few factions of professional training where you don't get paid for it. And just dread it. And I know Coach Meyer made allocations for kids who were student teaching, and so did Coach Patterson, but they hated it because they knew when they got to practice, because both Coach Meyer and Paul Patterson lived on the saying that basketball practice is just not another part of your day. And they got these kids who had just taught under scrutiny for 7 hours, and they're thinking about what they have to do the following day. So they are not 100% focused on the basketball program for the practice. And when I still talk to people about going into education, people today have forgotten about, or maybe not forgotten, that's not, I mean, it's been de-emphasized, the role of the student teacher on a college basketball team. It is extremely difficult. And I remember the first two people who broadcasted this publicly nationwide to anyone who would listen, whether it was a Nike clinic or the Taylor University clinic, were Paul Patterson, Dick Bennett, and Don Meyer. And again, beating a horse I've already kicked to death, we don't have anybody at the higher levels of college basketball, whether it's Division III, Division II, Division I, or NAIA, who are making these points publicly.
Yeah, I if you were in Coach Meyer's program, you were probably going to end up being a coach at some point. Our student assistant, we had student assistants that were at the Division I level right after they graduated. A lot of the players ended up, because the way he taught the game, the expectations, And, a lot of times in practice, he would, or in preseason, he wanted the older guys, or in camp, working with the little kids, you're going to teach them the skills. And so not only did they have to perform it, they now had to learn how to teach it. And, just by having them do those things, it created a great interest in being a teacher and a coach. They got that satisfaction you get from showing somebody how to do something, they get it, and they're able to, we'll say, master it in your week of camp, and you see kids improve and get better. And there's a great satisfaction from that. And so like the kids in Coach Meyer's program, we're doing that every summer, 8 weeks of teaching camp to little kids. And then in the preseason, teaching it to, the freshmen. And so you got this continuity of how things are taught, the same verbiage that you're using, same vocabulary. It's almost like you're destined to become a coach if you're working in that kind of program.
Well, and that's exactly, I mean, you just made 500 words into 50.
Well, if you sit in my English classes, it's usually the other way around. I take 500 words to say what takes 50.
Yeah, but I have I can't remember the name of the restaurant, but there was a popular restaurant in South Hammond that my wife and I would go to a lot, and for the life of me, I can't remember it. And one day we went in during the summer break, and the girl who waited on us at the bar or bar seat, whatever, had a Bishop Noll shirt on. I said, "Oh, you must know Mr. Patai." In her eyes lit up, she goes, "He made English easy." That was my anxiety point, was English. I'm a math person, and he changed my perspective of English. And it's fortuitous. My wife and I, after I broadcast some high school games for our local TV station, and Stephanie and I went to get dinner after one of the games at a Ralphie's, which Ralphie's is a popular sports bar here in Northwest Ohio. And we were sitting at a table by ourselves. I'm as deaf as a hatter, so if we sat anywhere near people, I couldn't hear her talk. And I wanted to get her breakdown of the game I just broadcasted. And the young lady who came over had a Springfield Township shirt on. And I said, "Oh, you must know Mr. Linehan, who's the head coach at Springfield." And she said, "Oh my gosh, I'm awful at math, and he made math fun and interesting, and he reached me, and he took all my anxiety away, and he spent time with me after class." And Stephanie looked at me, she goes, "That's exactly what that girl in Hammond said about Adam." And that's beating a dead horse. With, I know I've said it a million times, but Adam, those are the type of coaches / teachers who used to earn the right, stick your chest out and thump it like Tarzan. Yeah, I'm pretty damn good at what I do. And the evaluative tool from that are conversations. Now, this girl I met from Springfield and that girl who we talked to had the Bishop Noll t-shirt, we never announced ourselves as teachers. They had no idea. We never said that. So these statements were unsolicited, and also they thought that we were just your average Joe, whatever, which is the way we wanted. But we never told them there was a affiliation that we knew, because I know Kyle very well, Springfield. And those are the kind of teachers / coaches who Coach Meyer and Coach Patterson, those old school guys, more. The thing with Coach Meyer was coast to coast with his teaching. And a lot of, if you knew anything about basketball, you knew Don Meyer's name. Coach Patterson and Coach Bennett very rarely left Wisconsin, and Paul Patterson very rarely left Indiana. They just weren't that kind of clinician, where Coach Meyer was everywhere. But those were the types of qualities that Don Meyer adored.
Yeah, I thanks for telling me that story about the girl, because in coaching, we get, maybe we work with some players and we get to see the impact we have on them. But a lot of times we don't understand the impact we have on our students or our players until years later. So, that makes me feel good that girl would say that. But there's also, I think also with coaching, there's I know in Indiana, my friends used to say, because I was a head boys basketball coach, there was a little bit of ego. We all head coaches have egos, but I think I'm trying to do the right things, but I've been humbled in the game. I've had some seasons where we've been not very good, and that humbles you. And so you're, it's kind of like, got to keep working to get better, and you never know if you're reaching that point.
Well, you just hit a point that's a hot topic right now. Tom Johnson and I did a Courtcast 2 weeks ago, and you just announced another great separator. When people, you and I we might be the same age, but if we're not the same age, we're a throw of a baseball, pretty close. Anyway, your generation, my generation, whatever, coach Indiana high school basketball coaches. If you had a bad year, your focus, 1,000% of your focus was on next season and coming and making a comeback. And now these kids who are in head coaching positions, and especially the ones who aren't teachers, their first inclination is just to quit, because they don't, it's not that I don't think they don't want to make that comeback. I don't think they know how to do it.
Yeah. My first year, my first head coaching job, I was at Bishop Noll. They had not been very good the year before, but I was a hot shot. I'm going to come in, I'm going to turn this around. And we were not very good at all. And it was humbling. And it was like, all right. I remember talking to Coach, I just left Lipscomb to get, that would be the only place I would leave Lipscomb for, was for Bishop Noll. And he was like, I talked to him, I was struggling after the year. And he said, I remember we talked, and he's like, you're always welcome back here, but I'd be very disappointed if you come back and didn't build that program. It's not going to be easy. I said, all right, and I really didn't want to go back. I wanted to make it work at Noll, because I didn't want to run from it, but it was really hard,
Oh, Adam, and I'm glad you said that, because I know every state says they value athletics to a certain degree, and every state has their special helicopter parents, whatever. But if you're coaching in Indiana and you're coaching basketball, you're on a short leash.
Yeah.
And a lot of people don't understand that. Now, I know Kansas, and I know Northwest Ohio, and I know the state of Kentucky vehemently values high school basketball. Right now, I think Kentucky's the state who values it most, by and large. But if they're going to support a coach who isn't, one, putting dollars in the bank, and two, putting wins in the win column, and they stick with that person for a couple, 3 or 4 years, to me, that's a great coach. that's a coach who everybody in that community knows can coach. Maybe he just doesn't have the players, whatever the reason might be. But it's like when Coach Meyer used to say, don't go and study the guy who won 31 games. Go study the coach in your area who won 8 games, but doesn't have 8-game talent.
Yeah.
And my first boss at in the high school level of Indiana was Coach Cirque at Oak Hill, and he bought into that hardcore. The first coach he made me study in the off season, after watching the 4th or 5th VHS tape, looking at who he's playing in the Three Rivers Athletic Conference, this guy can flat coach. I mean, this guy, he just doesn't have an athlete who can create his own shot. Everything they have is manufactured out of their offense. So if they miss a shot, he can't call 1-4 low. He can't. It's a giant snowball versus the biggest ice cube. He can't call 1-4 low. He can't. There's nobody to call that for. But his kids can pass the ball and catch it and not throw it to the wrong team. And when they do get an open shot, when they make it, that's great. And they're also fantastic at offensive rebounding. Fantastic, because they have a scheme on offensive rebounding, and defensively they're unreal. But if they're playing a team who has a lot of players who don't need to rely on teammates, where they can break a guy down and make a tough bank shot from 14 feet off the left short corner, and the kid who's guarding him did have his left hand in his face, well, it would be hard for a rational earthling to blame the kid guarding him.
Yeah.
So, and Coach Meyer opened my eyes up to that. I know both Ohio and Indiana, I spent a lot of time with guys who were in great conferences and played against great players and finished near the bottom end of the conference, not the total end or last spot, but finished around that area. But the team who finished in that final last spot had far better players than he did. And I think, and I'm hoping that you disagree with this. I'm hoping that what I'm saying offends you. I am. But when we were coaching in Indiana together, those were the coaches who everyone kind of liked, who everyone kind of gave an attaboy to, because we all knew coaching that team's got to be hell. For example, that kid, Kevin Lentz, was at Whiting?
Who was that? That was 20 years ago. Yeah. I think about at Munster, I know in Indiana is huge now. They got a great program going. Before that, they didn't quite have the talent that they had, but Dave Knish was there. And I remember one year he had 2 outstanding players and he had a bunch of role players, and he found a scheme, got them playing hard, and they were so hard to beat. And there's things that I've stolen from him that I used. And so, yeah, you're right. It's the guy that wins, 20 games, he probably had some really, really good players, but it's that guy that maybe went 8-12 with 4-win talent. My JV coach, one of my JV coaches used to always say, he never saw a jockey carry the horse over the finish line, and you got to have players, but then once you got those players, can you coach them up? Can you make them play as a team? Can you build a good culture that they're going to thrive in?
Right, exactly. 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 Yeah, I it's a great point. And the other horseshoe I throw at civilians is when they say, well, he always has great players. For example, like Steve Whitty at Ben Davis when he was there. Yeah, he does, but someone has to develop those players.
Yeah.
Because coming from the area you and I came from, you might have some great athletes in Gary, but can you put five of them on the floor who can play together?
Yeah. Yeah. My first year at Noll, we weren't very, I mean, we were really bad. Our record was like 5-17. And, when I thought I did my best coaching job that year. I had a point guard, I had two guards. One could only dribble with their left hand, one could only dribble with their right hand. So if they got switched on the wrong side of the floor versus the press, it's probably going to be a turnover. But we got better. We worked at it. And then a couple years later, we got some really good, talented kids to come in, and our record was we were really good the last couple of years. And all of a sudden, those same people my first year were saying it was a mistake to hire me, is now like, oh, he's great. And that humbling first year, you learn to take criticism and the praise kind of equally. It's kind of like, don't get high, don't get too low, because it's like a lot of it is you can coach your butt off, but if you don't have the talent, can you squeeze everything out of those kids that you can?
Well, and right, and here's another factor that civilians don't understand. If you're coaching a team who's not having a lot of success, they're hearing about it from everybody. Every bad teacher in that building is bringing it up. It puts the kids in a great situation for life where here's how you eat shit. And some of the kids will say, well, I don't want to eat that. I'm going to support Coach Patai or Coach Sherrod, whoever. And they stick their chest out. And those are the kids who come from good homes, right? Where they see mom and dad come home exhausted for whatever their profession or whatever they do for a living. But my point is, the civilian doesn't understand if you're coaching a team who isn't very talented, but they are fairly above average, fundamentally trained, and you win 8 games with them, and you're in the LAC, the old LAC, or you're in a meat grinder of a conference, but yet you still win a couple games. The coaches in that area who have been around recognize that more so than the guy who wins 21 games, but 3 of the kids transferred in their senior year.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's, I think, as coaches, we can kind of recognize, like, oh, we have this school on our schedule, and everyone looks at, oh, you're going to win that game. They were, 8-17 last year. And it's like, yeah, they didn't win a lot of games, but man, are they hard to play against. They play hard. They play fundamental. They make it difficult for you. And those are the teams that you really hate to play,
Yeah, and we have quite a few of those type of teams here in Northwest Ohio. Those coaches are all blessed with administrators who all coached.
Yeah.
And they know when they're playing a Toledo City League team, their kids are way behind the dice when it comes to athleticism. And if they win that game 31-29, they celebrate. But no one of any substance is going to bellyache about only scoring 31 points.
Yeah, see that that idea of shortening the game and not giving more possessions to the talented team. Nevada is going to a shot clock in 2 years, and when I coached years ago, we played in tournaments in California and played with a shot clock, and for the most part, it didn't affect the game a whole lot. It was, I think it was like 35 seconds or whatever, but I still have some reservations about it because are you going to see more bad shots? Can an undermanned team hold the ball and control tempo? Again with a shot clock, so that
Right.
that takes a little bit of things kind of swing towards the talented team a little bit.
Yeah, they do. The other thing on the shot clock is, okay, when I say I'm not talking about me. I'm speaking in generalities. So my name is Joe Smith, and I've coached this team forever. And we run a motion offense, and we run a Basil Mobby 2-3 zone defense. But what we do is what we do. And when we go and play Fort Wayne Dranger or Toledo Central Catholic, whoever, they're going to have to adjust to us, but we're not adjusting to them. The shot clock ruins that coaching. And Don Meyer spoke for at least 25, if not 30 minutes on this at one of the last clinics I saw him speak at in Strongsville, Ohio. And we don't have a shot clock in Ohio, but it's coming. As soon as Indiana, Kentucky, or Iowa.
Yeah.
Those are the three states perennially known for great high school basketball. Once one of those three states adheres to the shot clock, then it's coming. But because I guess and you would know a hell of a lot more about this than me, but when Don Meyer was a high school coach, I guess he was in Minnesota, it had to play a deliberate game to be competitive.
Yeah, it's funny because when I got to Lipscomb, they were scoring 90 to 100 points a game, and I remember talking to him, and he said something about his defensive reputation, and I'm like, oh, I thought it would be offense because teams are so skilled. His post play is I think the top 2 scorers in college history are his post players,
Right.
and he said when he first started coaching, they were really tough defensively and very deliberate. And then, Lipscomb, they were still good defensively, but, they got up and down the floor as a very different style change, but when he first started, he had to find a way to make it work with what he had. And they were tough defensively and they were very deliberate on offense.
Yeah, he told me one time that when he was a high school coach in Minnesota, they ran a 4 corners and just penetrated. But defensively, they would change up a lot, whatever. But and Paul Patterson told me this one time at the IBCA clinic back in the 90s. If high school basketball succumbs to a shot clock, you had better be the head basketball coach at a big school where you have a lot of kids to choose from. Because if you're at a small school, and see, that's something else, Adam, people on the outside world don't understand. In Indiana, there aren't enough big schools where they don't have to play the small schools. In every area in Indiana, the big schools still have to fill their schedule with 4 or 5 small schools. And nobody will want to coach those schools with the shot clock.
Yeah. It'll make things difficult, And like here in Vegas, the schools are all pretty good sized, but they're fairly even, but like we said, there's so much competition for their time. Like we don't have as large a group of girls as maybe in the past coming out for girls. And so that hurts us. We have flag football in Nevada now, girls, and
for
for girls. And it's like our flag football team, their season is the same time as girls basketball. We've lost a lot of athletes to that.
They should be at the sorority they go to, the UNLV, for love of cry.
The flag football is it's pretty good. Like our team has won a couple state titles. They have a lot of the really good athletes, and so we've lost athletes to that sport.
That's unreal. I didn't realize that that far west flag football was a thing.
Yeah, it's gotten pretty big, and I think it's taken away from girls basketball out here.
Absolutely. Well, marginal athletes will always cater to the path of least resistance. Always. Always. Especially if their parents are wacko. So 2 Saturdays ago, I got up excessively early and drove from Bowling Green, Ohio, down to Jay County, Indiana. And I know when you were coaching at Bishop Noll, Coach Baumholt was at Southwestern Hanover, which is a small school. But Coach Baumholt's back at Jay County for round 2 because he was at Jay County 42 years ago.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, he's back at Jay County, and he is famous for his 1-2-2 zone defense. He calls it Zorro. So I ran into him last April at the RBCN clinic and said, "Hey, I'd like to drive down to Jay County and record one of your practices." And most of those guys who have won, 900 high school basketball games are fairly difficult to talk to. Well, Baumholt is Jerry Baumholt is the exact opposite. He's like, "Are you serious?" Like, "Oh yeah, I'm really serious." He goes, "Well, I remember playing against you when you were at Lakeview. I will email you once we start the season." And typically that's a death sentence, because none of those guys follow through on it. So I got the email from him. This is the Saturday I've chosen to host you and teach all the intricacies of our 1-2-2. So I got up really super early, disgustingly early, and made it down to Jay County, Indiana, and videotaped this thing. And after he got done talking to his kids and putting him through the rigmarole of the 1-2-2, he said, "Okay, now it's your turn. I want you to talk to my kids." Well, I had nothing prepared. I mean, this was a John Kruk moment where Randy Johnson's on the pitcher's mound. What is that? The 1998 All-Star game. So I'm about ready to drop the bat. Well, I've taught for 30 years. I can figure this out. So I addressed the Jay County kids. Everybody in this area, in that area of Indiana, basketball's still really important, but not everybody in this state those kids are not getting the same amount of specific instruction that you're getting. And I kind of went off the rails, but the inline of my speech was, when you and I were coaching in Northwest Indiana, there wasn't any kid who made the varsity roster who wasn't getting great instruction.
Yeah. That was like every school, and we had a little fraternity of coaches meeting every so often. We'd exchange tapes, but we'd end up talking basketball. I mean, you knew whoever you were going against week to week, they're going to be well coached, and it made me a better coach. Hopefully playing against us made them better, and it made you you had to take things seriously in your off season and your teaching, because you're going to be embarrassed if you weren't prepared,
Yeah. And I can remember, you and I used to sit around in our apartment in Highland. I can't remember the name of the apartment complex, but Stephanie would make dinner, and we would X and O until the lights went out. And I can actually remember a couple mornings where you stayed the night, and we both got up and had to zip off to school. But one of the things that happened, I will say to me, and maybe I can make this an us thing. One of the things that happened to me that made me a better coach was going to the Variety Lounge on a Friday night after a game and getting what I did wrong from Beaver Marcinek, Nino Muffaletto, Tommy Ecker, all those, Jim McDonald. And I remember you and I sat together several nights at the Variety, and we both had the adage of, I've got my helmet on, because I know you and I, we're both going to get shelled by these old guys. But everything they told us when you and I were always the first two young coaches out of the bar. We were the first two out to go back home. And as we were walking back to our cars, we would talk about, I hate to say it, but they're right. It kills me to say it, but yeah, they're right.
Yeah. And you could, obviously walking out of the gym, you had your fans telling you what you did wrong. And it's like, you try and ignore those people. But when you got to those guys that have been coaching for 40, 50 years, and they saw the game from a coach's perspective, hey, why'd you call off the press? You had them beat, you called it off way too early. And it's like, and grudgingly, you'd be like, yeah, you're right. That's something I got to keep in the file in my mind here for the next time,
Yeah, to further your point, we're both either in our late 20s, early 30s at that period of time. And the people who are giving us instruction are pushing, I mean, they're all retired. None of them are coaching. They are retired they have an Indiana State ISTA retirement. To credit Don Meyer, they go to our games to help us. I know Beaver Marcinek told me one time, if you're going to survive in Northwest Indiana, you've got to make a lot of changes. You're trying to utilize a central northern Indiana offense, And you're not in north central Indiana. You are in northwest Indiana, where the kids here are going to go and play college basketball. And they're all being coached by somebody who's won 500 games. And I can, my wife and I talked about this last night. We can vividly remember you and I talking about, will we ever be one of those guys?
Yeah.
Because they had so much impact on us.
Yeah. And there was a camaraderie among that. It was a nice coaching community. Out here in Vegas, it's a little different. Indiana basketball is just taken more seriously than in other places. But there are some really good coaches, and there's a guy he was at Foothill High School when I coached. He's at Liberty High School. He just won a state title a few years ago, Kevin Soares. And like I always tell my wife, and I'm like, man, he belongs back in the region back home. That's how good he is.
Who is he?
Kevin Soares.
Oh, yeah, from Highland.
No, he's out here. He's a coach out here. He went to Nevada, Reno.
But did he start at Highland?
He's been out here his whole career, Kevin
okay.
Soares. But he reminds me of a guy that you went up against in the region. Well coached. Works really hard. Just you never wanted to play his teams, because if they had really a whole lot of talent, you probably weren't going to beat them. And then if you didn't have a lot of talent, it was going to be really hard to beat them. Same. And so that's that's
the guy can coach.
Yeah.
The guy can coach. And that's one of my mentors told me 32 years ago, if the other coaches in your league or your sectional do not want to play you, you're pretty good at what you do.
Yeah. Yep. And that's exactly how this guy is. He reminded me of those guys that you and I had to compete against when we were Northwest Indiana. I always tell my wife, and that's like, I think for me, that's like one of the biggest compliments I can give. Man, that guy, he could coach in Indiana.
Oh, absolutely. I remember finishing my first year at Oak Hill, and Coach Cirque was Don Meyer-esque in that the coaches and teachers he hired there, our summer activities were, he gave us programs to study, and none of the programs we were issued won a sectional. It were people, coaches he saw through the state of Indiana who won games they shouldn't have won. And that was his big thing. If you're beating people you shouldn't beat, you're a hell of a coach.
Yeah.
So I do want to bring this up, because this is one of my favorite of all time of my basketball travels. This is still one of my favorite stories. So you and I jump in my old piece of junk Ford Taurus, and we zip down to Indianapolis from Gary, Indiana, to the RBCN clinic. And I had taken care of all the paperwork to get there. And we get to, after the clinic on the first night, Friday, we get to the hotel, and they tell me that we haven't registered for anything. And I kind of throw a fit at the desk, and you and I end up in a storage room, and they threw 2 sleeping bags in the storage room. No restroom. So for us to use the restroom, we had to knock on the door across the way to use the restroom. And luckily, the people across the way from us were cool. But our first clinic together where we went out of the region, it was nonsensical because we get in the elevator. It was crazy. But anyway, my point is, you and I were like, yeah, as long as we got a room. I mean, just give us a couple of pillows.
Nice to sleep.
Yeah, give us a couple of pillows. Where do we use the restroom? Whatever. Because we had no running water in the storage room that they stuck us in. And we ended up having a really good weekend. And on the way back home, we stopped at my local bar, the Idle Hour, which is fairly close to the region. Anyway, we ate hamburgers and told stories and drank a few adult beverages. And you said, well, I want to see the gym you played in. Well, I can make that happen. So we zipped over, and I remember when we walked into the gym, your jaw dropped. Shit, this must seat 8,000 people. Yeah, no, it's a different world, anyway, and then when I got to talk to the kids after Coach Baumholt did a complete from the 101 to Adam, what do they call masters? I mean, is that 501, whatever? I don't know.
For what now?
When I went to watch Jerry Baumholt at Jay County teach his zone on that Saturday, is a master's degree 501?
Oh, yeah, I think those are the advanced level classes.
Yeah, 501. So we went from 101 to 501, and I'm talking to and he wants me to talk to the kids afterwards, which I had nothing prepared, but I'm like, you need to value what you're hearing, because not every high school kid gets to hear the specificity and the directness of what you're being taught. Because there are kids in Indiana, and it kills me to say it, because it wasn't like this, Adam, when you and I coached and taught there. There are kids in this great state of Indiana who are hearing phrases like, just get it done. Go do it. Well, Coach Baumholt's telling them, go over their top shoulder, seal their inside foot, and those are the terms you and I were raised with. So it's definitely different. Now, the last thing I want to bring up, and I say this for last on purpose, because when you and I both heard this, we were coaching in Northwest Indiana, and there was a bar / eatery that you and I went to. Everybody else went to Finky's, but this was right. But this bar that you and I would go to was maybe an eighth of a mile north of Finky's, but it was still on Indianapolis Boulevard on the east side. I can't remember the name of it.
No, but I know exactly what you're talking about.
Okay.
But I can't remember either.
Yeah, it was dark, and you and I could sit and draw on napkins, and no one bothered us. But Coach Meyer got a big gig. I mean, this was one of his biggest gigs at a clinic, in Kelvin Sampson poked fun at him.
Yeah.
And when Coach Meyer got the microphone, he said he's forgotten where he came from. And then went on a rant, and like every person at that clinic who was a Don Meyer disciple developed a pointed hatred for Kelvin Sampson for saying that.
Yeah, Sampson, I remember that. Sampson came up and made some comments about how he wasn't here to sell tapes or videos,
Right.
And like Coach Meyer, when he did a clinic, he liked doing like a weekend clinic where he would be the only speaker for like 3 days, because then you can learn the person's system. You went to some of those clinics where a guy might have an hour, he would tell jokes or stories for 30 minutes, and you might get some basketball for 30 minutes. And, Coach had his jokes and things that he would do, but he wanted to get basketball instruction to you.
But if Don Meyer had a 60-minute limit, 50 of the minutes would be life-changing basketball.
Yep, definitely. Yeah. And so, Sampson kind of took a shot, like, oh, his books and videos, like Coach Meyer wasn't there to like teach us to be better coaches. You know what I mean? Like, it was a money-making thing. And then for the next 30 minutes, he told stories rather than do that. Sampson told stories rather than doing basketball.
Right.
It was like Coach was just like you said, he forgot where he came from,
Yeah. In two more things I'll say about Coach Meyer and Coach Patterson is whenever you talked to one of those two guys, they gave you their cell numbers. They did. They gave you full access. So when I first moved up to the region, that's when Jim East's full court man-to-man run and jump was impossible. I mean, it was a nightmare. And so I've got the Gavitt job with not very good basketball players, but I really like these kids, whatever. So I called Coach Patterson, and he told me what he'd do. So I called Coach Meyer, and they both said basically the exact same thing. So we put these kids in the scenario that I learned from these two coaches, and it was verbatim. Basically, both of them said the exact same thing. We only get beat by 10. Now, a civilian would say a loss is a loss. Okay. But Adam, I think you would agree with, if Hammond Gavitt gets beat by 10 by Maryville, that's fairly significant.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, it's a loss. It's a loss. But our kids walked out of that gym in the locker room with their heads high. And if anyone's ever coached, they would know those kids were like, okay, so this guy knows what he's doing. Because this could have easily been a 50 or 60 point blowout. So my point in saying that is talking to Coach Meyer on the phone and him walking me through how he attacked a very athletic man-to-man run and jump. And I could picture it because, Coach Meyer spoke in specificities. I could envision it, and I was writing on a legal pad, whatever. But that's the thing one of the things I think coaches nowadays are losing out on are Coach Meyer and Coach Patterson and Coach Platt, the guy I played for, always approached every situation from a point of disadvantage.
Yeah. And it was, here's how we're going to, even it out or gain the advantage, but it was through how we teach it. Like you say, right. Specificity. It's the angle of your feet on the closeout. It's where your hands are when guarding the ball, and it wasn't just, hey, get back on defense. There was an organized approach to your transition defense, and that, everything, your offense helped out your defense by your court spacing and the way you got back. Your defense helped your offense, and everything was interconnected. And it was that, we're going to do it this way for this you knew the purpose, you knew why your hands had to be in a certain place, and everything in your system. Like Coach Meyer loved to get new ideas, but he'd always say, get all the ideas you can, but only use those that fit in what you're doing. So if you're playing zone, it's really hard to teach completely different defensive fundamentals than if you're playing man, because you want to teach consistency. So your players were doing it right all the time, So yeah,
right. It goes back to it. I know I'll get some hate for this, but using Bellarmine, recruiting the kid who can play for you and be successful.
Yeah.
Because one of my favorite Adam Patai stories was you guys had a kid at Lipscomb. It reminded me of the fantastic batter on the first major leagues, Joe Boo or whatever his name was. And you guys had a kid like that, and it didn't work out. And you said to Coach Meyer, well, I think Joe Boo lied or whatever. There was some story like that.
Yeah, you can be, you try and recruit the best players, but working for Coach Meyer, and in high school you can't really do that, but in college it's like you got to get the kid. Even in high school, to an extent, you get the kids in your program that are going to be most successful. It's not always the best players, it's the best team you can put on the floor, because that super talented kid might be undisciplined, have a bad attitude, and a coach killer, or like I used teacher killer earlier in the podcast. But it's just there's the book about getting the 5 best on the bus. You know what I mean? Get the best team on the bus.
Right. Yeah, I'm glad you said that, because you and I used to sit around in the most obscure establishments in the region, or I'd go to your apartment, or you would come to my apartment, and Stephanie would cook dinner for us. And we had some of the best conversations of my coaching life. We went through every offense that was imaginable. And we had notebooks, legal pads, everything. And we had scribbled on all of them. And I'm not sure we ever came to an answer, but I knew we were thinking about the game. And I also know if I got destroyed, if my kids got destroyed by somebody, you were the first person to say, hey, Saturday, you and Stephanie come over here and we're just going to talk about life. And the same thing. No, I'm not sure you ever got destroyed at Bishop Noll. But I can remember you would call me, because this is before texting, and say, hey, I need a home cooked meal. And you would come over and Stephanie would cook whatever. And then you and I would sit in the family room and just talk about basketball and teaching and public education by and large. And the bottom line was, you had this really cool, you and Tom Johnson both were the only 2 guys in my years in the Calumet region. Adam Patai and Tom Johnson were the only 2 coaches who were off limits, even at the Variety Lounge, to criticize, because everybody knew how well your teams were prepared. And I know, and I understand someone would say, well, what about Coach Gabor Griffith? Yeah, well, yes, you're right, Coach Gabor at Griffith, but Coach had been there so long, he was out of that repertoire. I mean, there wasn't anybody there who knew basketball, where Coach Gabor was out of that realm. Beaver, Marcinek, Nino Muffalo, those guys were out. Jim McDonald, they were out of that vacuum where they were going to be criticized. They were the guys. They were the studs. But what my time there, Adam Patai, Doug McAllister, and Tom Johnson were the three names which were I don't want to say untouchable because that's not realistic, but I want to say I will say this: they were the three names where if anyone who knew Nino or Beaver or Jim McDonald or Rogie, was it Dale? I can't remember Coach Rogie's first name. But there was a short list of people who went to the Variety Lounge Friday and Saturdays after every high school basketball game. There was a short list of people who were not going to be criticized. They weren't. It was just off the table because you were the free future of the game. Adam Patai, Doug McAllister, Russ Marcinek, help me out. They were untouchable because you guys have imposed on these old school Calumet region coaches who had all been to the Final Four except for Nino, and Nino got screwed one year deep in the tournament on a half-court shot by somebody, whatever. But all these guys were recognized in that community by and large as the godfathers of basketball, right?
Yes. And I think you're exaggerating a little bit putting me on that list because I'm not. I appreciate the kind words. I do.
No, I'm not, because I can remember sitting at the Variety Lounge, and if Beaver Marcinek endorsed you, you were a hell of a coach because Beaver doesn't like people. By and large, he doesn't. He doesn't. I've always thought Beaver was the most popular alien on the planet because he hates Earthlings. He does. And Nino would be a close second. Now Nino is not as vicious as Beaver. And then you add in Bradkey, who was the only Indiana All-Star who didn't live in Indiana, because Bradkey lived in Thornville, Illinois when he made the Indiana All-Star team. So you had these guys who had a specific vision of how the game should be played. Beaver Marcinek, Jack Gabor. But in that period of time, Coach Gabor was still coaching. But the guys outside of basketball were Nino Muffalo, Jim McDonald, Beaver Marcinek, Coach Bradkey. So you're taking these five guys and you're thinking, okay, so you've got close to, you've got well over 1,000 wins when you add all those guys together, and then they publicly endorse you. Shit, you're once you got a endorsement in Hessville from Beaver Marcinek, no one was going to question it. And you know that, Adam. You know it.
Well, I don't remember it quite that way, but I do appreciate it because I always felt on the hot seat, and any success we had, it's the kids that we had really good players, and everything. Well, everything I've done, I've stolen from other coaches.
Yeah, right. Well, every coach has that, and that's coaching. But I can remember sitting at the Variety Lounge like it was yesterday. And Beaver Marcinek, Jim McDonald, and Nino Muffalo all said there are two teams in Northwest Indiana who can play racehorse or plow horse. Doesn't matter. Adam Patai's Bishop Noll, or Tom Johnson's Crown Point. They can play you, whether it's a full court pressing, get up after you, or it's a half court game. Those are the only two teams in Northwest Indiana who can adjust accordingly. And when people like that say something, because Nino Muffaletto had no Patai strings. I mean, he wasn't like your grandfather.
No, he beat us a few times too. So it wasn't like,
But Beaver Marcinek,
yeah.
The thing about Beaver that I will take to my grave, Beaver Marcinek doesn't like anyone. He doesn't. He doesn't. But if Beaver Marcinek propagates a person, that's a big deal in Northwest Indiana. It's a big deal. It's a huge deal because everybody knows, because Beaver played at Kansas with Wilt Chamberlain,
Yeah.
and Beaver won 3 national championships at Kansas, and then he came back home and won at Morton. So Beaver Marcinek is not going to say something nice about another Earthling. He's not. He's not trained to do that. So if he said, because Beaver's thing was Adam Patai, Tom Johnson, these are the two guys who can play in any aspect of any flow of the game. I was lucky enough to be sitting there when those things were said, and then like even Nino is a brilliant basketball mind. Brilliant. He's one of the most abstract minded. I can't say I never talked to Coach McGuire from Marquette, but from what I read about him's or Coach Marquette's coaching style, I immediately think of Nino, because Nino always saw something and thought, well, what is the counter? And how do you so when those guys brought your name into the conversation with Coach Gabor and Coach Hackett at Munster, Coach Hackett, I think it means something. I think it still means something to this day in Northwest Indiana, because a lot of people, Adam, don't understand. If you take a basketball team from wherever, like I saw your team destroy Bullitt County from Kentucky in that Hammond that Holiday Classic we used to have in the Civic Center, and you guys just made them look foolish, and that ended up being the early loss in the season. People don't understand how physical and how skilled and how good, how well the coaches or the players in Northwest Indiana are being coached. It's a different world. The running joke used to be, okay, so I got Maryville on Friday, and then Gary Wirt on Saturday, which is Omar Vasquez.
Yeah.
Well, truth be told, Omar Vasquez is a hell of a harder lot. I mean, he was a hell of a coach.
Yeah.
Hard to coach, hard to play against. And then, you might have Lake Central with Jim Black. And that's a whole different world, because now you got to play at their pace. So it's a really unique area. My point in saying that is I hope a lot of the young coaches who are listening to this Courtcast research how hard it used to be to get a job in Indiana as a head coach. It was a big deal.
Yeah, I mean, I know, I left Lipscomb to get the job at Noll, and it was the only place I would have left Lipscomb for. And, you knew you had to be prepared, and
Yeah, but even with that being said, when Southport offered you the job, you weren't leaving Knoll.
no, I probably wouldn't have left Noll for anything, and then,
Well, I know that for a fact because Southport's soup was a friend of my dad. They called you and offered you the job on the spot, and you weren't leaving Knoll.
yeah, but I mean, it just goes back to, you know, we talk about having the right players. I mean, you gotta get yourself in the right place too, where you can thrive, the type of community you want to be in, and I think I was lucky. Bishop Noll was a great place. I worked for a lot of great coaches that I stole a lot from, and got to have some success. And then I've been at Green Valley. This is my 20th year. I've been a head coach there for 15 years, but this is another place I'd never leave because it's the right community, it's the right place for me.
Funny you say that because I was at Stephanie and my wife Stephanie and I went to for a love of cry we went to a small college basketball facility. They invited us to watch their last practice. And I love watching practices. That's my thing. I like watching practices. And one of the people who were at this facility asked me how Coach Patai was doing. And he had played for you at Bishop Noll, and through the oil industry, it went from Gary to Findlay, because Findlay is the big oil field here northwest. And we took him out for dinner afterwards. And he had told us that he knew that you and I were good friends, and but he 90% of what he said was more about your English classes than what he learned in basketball. And so when we dropped him off back in his car at University of Findlay parking lot, Stephanie's like, that's the biggest compliment Adam can ever get, ever.
Yeah, I mean, I would probably think he probably got a lot of naps in class, but it goes back to kind of what I learned from my mentors. It's, you want to be a great teacher. I try to be, and then you want to be a student of the game.
Rashad, his first name's Rashad.
Rashad Humes. Yep.
Rashad Humes. Okay, I couldn't remember his.
Yep,
Okay,
I know exactly who you're talking about.
God, and it was a beautiful thing. We're sitting there and he's telling us about your English classes. And no, Adam, and you know as well as I do, that's the big separation.
Yeah, I mean, I work at it. That's all I can say is there. I'm just as critical after like I'm teaching AP Lit for the first time this year, and I had a crappy activity that we did in class, and it just bugged me. And it's the same way as if in a game or a practice we did a drill or a sequence, and it's like, well, that sucked. I got to do better next time. And that's just kind of the way I look at it, because I know I'm not I think taking the idea that you're not a finished product, you just got to keep working at it. I think that's the way I try and do it. You got and this reminds me of a story Coach Meyer used to say. Besides being a good teacher, being a student of the game, he would often talk about take responsibility for everything, because if you don't take responsibility, you have no power to change it. It's like, so he would tell a story at every clinic where he just got the job at Lipscomb, and there were 3 envelopes in the desk drawer, and it said open envelope 1 after your first season. So, Coach Meyer would go, 7-20. He opens the first envelope and it says blame last year's coach.
Yep.
So then he would, we just, we're trying to get past what Coach Smith taught him last year. We're trying to get our system. So second year, they go 10-20, and he opens a second envelope. Blame the players. Players just aren't working hard enough, blah, blah, blah. And then third season, they're 15-20, open the third envelope, write 3 envelopes, and it's like, leave it for the next coach. And his thing was like, take responsibility. If it didn't work out, then it's your fault. What are you going to do to make it better? If it's somebody else's fault, there's absolutely nothing you can do then.
Yeah, that's stuff that young coaches need to hear. It's like when you and I were at that IBCA clinic, and we stood around at the counter for 45 minutes, and they found a storage room for us to sleep in. And they told us, okay, well, the nearest restroom is over here, but you have to take the elevator up to use the restroom. And you and I looked at each other. Well, there's no reason we just can't use the restroom in the elevator. It was, and we went to the clinic the following day. And when we left, we were riding together. It was like, I learned more about life not getting a hotel room. Because if you remember, the headliner of that speaker or at that clinic was Bill Self talking about his high-low offense. And at that period of time, neither one of us had a player who we could go high-low for. So we were more interested in, the next speaker. The next speaker was Brad Doherty, who I think it was for his first year at North Carolina, I think. And he screamed at everybody in the audience, if you're going to talk while I'm talking, just leave. So you and I got up and left. But God, I'm not going to say it's 30 years ago, because that's not true, but we're pushing 30. That was a long time ago.
Yeah. And you have a much better memory than I do now.
I do. And I can remember sitting in your apartment or my apartment and wearing out anything that had a flat surface with X's and O's. And neither one of us really had correct me if I'm wrong, but neither one of us really knew at that period of time what we were going to get nailed to our coffin with. This is what we do. Yeah.
And I think that's something that, like, young coaches have to realize. It takes a couple of years to kind of figure it out. Like when I got to Noll, I had spent some time in Indiana watching practice. Don Meyer, we were going to run motion offense, the 5-man motion, and we couldn't score, and we were giving up a lot of points. And we started really simplifying our offense, and more of like what we learned at Lipscomb. I learned at Lipscomb, and put a greater concentration on. I was going to be a great innovative offensive coach. Well, it didn't turn out that way. You got to focus. I found I had to focus more on defense, because the only way we're going to win some games. We had to stop people, and then after 3-4 years, you kind of figure out, you know what, this is me. This is what I'm good at teaching. This is what is important to me, and then you just got to figure out how to get better teaching it.
Well, your defense was never, not to say your offense was suspect. That's not my point, but coming from a perspective of preparing for your Bishop Noll teams, defense on your side was outstanding.
Well, I mean, thank you. We tried. I know early we were an old like Dick Bennett on the line, up the line, pressure in, and we were giving up layups because people were just getting right by us, and we
You
went
guys were harder. Bishop Noll was harder to play against when you went to gaps off the ball.
Yeah,
You were way harder to play against.
We started really playing like, a lot of like no middle. That was the whole thing. We're going to own the middle of the lane. And, we shaved like 10, 12 points a game off our average, and
we did offensively. And you're going to forgive me because it's been a long, Adam, it's hard to believe it's almost been 30 years. I can't remember the name of your shooters, but you had those shooters who were coming off of multiple screens, and it was automatic. They were automatics. If they got both feet set, 10 toes pointing at the rim, they were automatic. And I can't remember their names.
We had the kid Gary Patterson that played at Butler and IUPUI, and then we had a little Mike Pastrick was another guy.
Yes,
but you're a better coach when you got guys that can put it in the hole. You know what I mean? Or you got a big kid.
Right. I'm not going to disagree with that, but I will also say that those kids would have struggled at Andrean with the lack of specificity that they were getting. I had to play, both of them. In Noll at that period of time was much more difficult to defend, much more.
Well, thank you. I mean, we tried. I know that we put the work in, and we tried.
When I say much more difficult to defend, to be more specifically, the screening angles you put your screeners in were where they should be, because your screeners are the people who make the opposition make decisions.
Yeah, and that was one of the things, like especially from Meyer. Even watching, I got to watch Bob Knight in practice for 2 years when I was at IU, and everyone talks about their motion offense, and it was small patterns that they practiced over and over. And it was like, I remember their pre-practice, and Calbert Cheney was there, and Ron Felling, their Dan Dockett's, the assistants were running through stuff. And it was like the footwork coming off a screen, and at the high school level, we couldn't get that, detailed because you just don't have the time. But they would spend, coming off and then getting to the shoulder of the screener and making that decision of what you're going to cut, what cut you're going to make, because you're reading the defense, and the screener's got these angles. And it was a complex offense, but they broke it down into its simplest terms, and made it easy to learn.
Right. Now, the flip side of that coin is motion offense with a 5-man with the 5-man free range, like we talked about chickens earlier, free range eggs, can be extremely difficult to teach. when you consider things like keeping the court balanced, whatever, um, I had an awful time with it. My college coach was a blocker mover guy, and I understood that. I understood
Yeah.
blockers and movers. I know, and that's what we ended up running for a majority of my career. But
Yeah, and after my first few years at Noll, we went to more, we less free range chickens and a little more structure. We went more high low motion, but we tried to emphasize role identification. So like, hey,
oh, your high low stuff was the thing about your high low stuff that was impossible was okay. So every coach worth their salt in a team who is preparing for a team who pounds the ball inside is ball pressure. Go get them. Don't let them pass the ball inside. But your angle of attack for the high post, or I'm sorry, the low post on the high low game basically made the game 1-4 low. Because if that kid could get past an aggressive closeout who's looking for the low post on a high low game, now you've opened up a lot of different cans of worms. You've opened up the wings, you've opened up the weak side block, you've opened up a lot of things. And now you've opened up enough different things where the preparing head coach better be the Jeff Bezos of high school basketball, because that closeout from the top of the floor in that high-low game that you ran is 180 80 degrees different than the closeout from a wing to post closeout. It's completely different animal. And the thing that your kids did on an aggressive closeout from the top of the key were rip drive and find the open guy. And unfortunately, folks who are listening to this, that rip drive leads to a layup.
Yeah, I mean, we really simplified things, and I like I always felt comfortable teaching post play because Coach Meyer and then the assistant coach Mike Roller. Mike Roller's is the best. I know not a lot of people know of him. He's a high school coach, and then he coached at Lipscomb University. And I learned, I could do a sliver of what they could do, what they could teach. And
But with that being said, Coach, with the high-low game you employed against an aggressive closeout at the top of the floor, the kids who were closest to the rim didn't need a lot of post moves. It was just a good finish, because you're doing the smart thing, which is what people call a dribble drive now, which kills me because you have to dribble the ball to drive it, but whatever. but when your high postman was a true north, he was at the top of the key or varied 8 feet one way or the other. But when he got a aggressive closeout and put the thing on the deck, you're playing for layups.
Yeah, I mean,
somebody has to help, and the person who's closest to the ball to help is a person guarding a post player.
Yeah, and we were lucky. A couple of years we had a really good post where they didn't want to help off them, so our high post could get to the rim, get to the basket, score.
It's a nightmare to prepare for, because the two kids you have volleyball line extended, can hit over 40% of the 3-point shots. So it was like going on the Jefferson show, George Jefferson, and telling him you're a Republican. I mean, it's a tough situation.
Well, again, when you like I said, you never saw a jockey carry the horse over a finish line. When you got good players, the games, when your O's are bigger than their X's, that makes things a little bit easier. So,
Yeah, I mean, you're right. I agree with that, but I do go back to what Don Meyer told me when I was 24 years old. Don't chastise a good program because someone had to develop those players. Someone had to develop them. And I got to coach against your teams enough. It was fun for me to listen to you. It was fun for me at those days to X and O with you. There's a person here who wants to see you.
Hello.
Yeah, remember her?
Long time. Yes.
Well,
she looks exactly the same.
She does. It is crazy because you do and she does. But the great thing about those days was, and I miss this, is I would come home from Gavitt off season. We were both out season. Said Adam's coming over tonight, and she like, oh my god, because she loved to listen because Stephanie is like the ultimate teacher. I mean, her life is teaching, but you two would talk about your classroom structure and teaching, and I would sit in the corner and I would end up watching Jeopardy or whatever. But and that's a good thing because Adam Patai's passion for his classroom, yeah, I'm not talking like it's gone. It's not a passing, but those guys who have that same grit for their civilian students who don't play for them, but they want them to get not a good, but a great experience in their classroom. And then the kids who play for Adam on the basketball team, it's like, well, I told you I was at Jerry Baumholtz's clinic practice in Jay County, and he was just as invested in telling me about the badminton unit that they were putting in next week. And Jay County is one of the biggest gyms in the state of Indiana, and he's worried about how they're going to segregate all these different courts for badminton. Yeah, guys, when Stephanie and I and Adam, and of course Jerry Baumel's 20 years older than us, Adam, when we retire, it's terrifying. It's terrifying.
Yeah, I know. Like just at Green, I've been at Green Valley a long time, so I teach freshmen and seniors, so I teach them at both ends, and it's teaching still a lot of fun. It's I still have 8 or 9 years left, and it's I think about that sometimes because some of my colleagues are retiring, and it's like, what am I going to do? I won't miss grading, but I'll miss the interactions with the kids.
Oh, in my perspective is the kids who are getting the education you provide are they're getting a education from someone who has an absolute passion for what they learn. And I can't speak for what's like in Vegas, but I can speak for what's like here in Ohio, in Northwest Ohio. Northwest Ohio is close enough to Indiana that we're basically the same entity. But kids are I mean, I'm almost at year 30. Public school kids are starving for what you and I used to consider a normal classroom.
Yeah. Yeah. We have kids, they crave attention, positive feedback, attention from their teachers. And, like some of them, it's nice. They come back by your classroom later in the day just to say hi, or, you know what I
Right.
mean? The next year they'll come back, even like the kids that drove you absolutely crazy and you were calling home on them or whatever, they'll come back. Hey, Mr. Patai. Hey, Coach Sheridan, you miss me? Don't you want me back in class this year? I missed your class. And it's like, oh my God, I wanted to kill you half the time. But
Right.
they crave somebody that, cares about them. Hey, I want you to do well. Start doing your homework, or,
Well, you know what? The word you just used is significant. Care. You care about them. You want them to be successful.
yeah.
And there's a point where we want them to be more successful than they want to be, or their parents. But also, like where I'm at now, since I'm not coaching basketball, I got shipped off to K through 5 PE, which is arguably the best job in any school district, because those kids love gym class.
Yes.
They love it. They love it. But they come in with shoes 2 sizes too small or no socks. Well, I can fix that lickety split. So we come in, next week with the shoes that fit them and give them socks. Well, now that kid has just signed up to the Sheridan fan club.
Yes. Yep.
I mean, he's never going to forget that, or she. But it's not because of anything other than, okay, you've recognized that I'm not getting taken care of holistically 24 hours a day, but you just gave me these things that make my life easier. You make my life easier. So my wife's the same way at the middle school. But my point in saying all those things, Adam, is we are a dying breed. A kid shouldn't come to me 6th period with no socks on.
Yeah. Yep.
I mean, we're a dying breed. We are bastions of Don Meyer, Paul Patterson, Dick, whatever. Where, and you said it 3 different times in this podcast, where you are supposed to be special in these kids' lives, special. And I think there has to be a renaissance or some kind of push where what you and I believe in when we were 24 years old was the norm, is the norm for these kids. And I'm not sure how to make that happen. I'm working my butt off trying to make this happen, but when a kid says in a restaurant / bar, Adam Patai made a difference in my life, he made English easy. And then, like, when we were at Ralphie's and they said the same about Kyle Linehan, but I had never referenced that I knew those people. My terrifying my envision for public education that terrifies me is in 10 years, kids won't say those things about anybody.
Yeah, I mean, I know for me, growing up, came from a real dysfunctional home. So, Jack Gabor was that kind of shining light, all my teachers and coaches. And I think that's why I was influenced to become a teacher and a coach, because I wanted to give back too, because I would have been lost without,
But
those people.
right, but what you're saying, Jack Gabor is that guy who can take a kid who pays attention to him. That's the number one thing. A kid who pays attention to him and a kid who wants to do things the right way. And Jack Gabor can make that kid into somebody. He can. He can make that kid into somebody. And my fear is those guys like Jack Gabor are gone. That terrifies me. There should be a place in public education for a Derek Sheridan or an Adam Patai who are not gifted athletes, but want to do these things in their life. And people like Jack Gabor facilitate that.
Yeah, and I think what you're doing is going a long way to keeping that, development of people, helping coaches, developing coaches, doing your clinics and everything. I think that helps tremendously.
I appreciate that, but I can the other roadblock I've got. Then I know, Adam, I'm killing your evening. When you and I were 28-year-olds, and if there's a clinic broadcasted, it might be a 4-hour drive. Our biggest issue is going to be drawing the short straw who has to drive. But we're there. I mean, we're going to go, and we're going to listen, and we're going to take a boatload of notes. And one of my, with me saying that, one of my missions is now that I'm down to a short rope on how many years I have left on this earth, is how do we get high school basketball coaches, boys and girls, invested in those on the court clinics? Because I understand that the virtual clinics are easy, but when you go to an on the court clinic, you meet people from other parts of the state. You get other perspectives. You get to hear war stories. I mean, I can remember you and I sitting at Taylor University, and the person next to us talked to us about getting fired in the middle of the year, but they still let him coach A-Terry basketball. And so you and I are like, this is kind of awkward, but it is a fantastic experience.
Yeah. I like, and I think, like, I went to the Nike clinic for the first time in years out here in Vegas. It was so good to get back out, meeting people. But I also, like, some of those sessions are too short. They're going for an hour. And if we could do more of those, like, one-man clinics where they spend a whole day going through a little more in depth with, here's how we teach it, here's why we teach it, and interjecting those stories. Those are the clinics I enjoyed the most.
Yeah, absolutely. You have a chance to listen to someone like Paul Patterson or Steve Platter or Don Meyer or whoever, and they can interject. Like, one of my favorite stories about you at Lipscomb was you got some huge kid from a different country, and the like Jobu lied or whatever. That was funny. But I along with the people who will listen to this Courtcast, Adam, God bless you. Thank you for bringing your perspective to us because it's valuable. You've not only been a successful high school coach, you've worked for Don Meyer, you've done more things in the game of basketball that most of us can relate with. And plus, from my perspective, I know my wife's perspective, you're a good guy. I mean, you're a good guy. So thank you.
Hey, thanks for having me. It reminds me of 20-some years ago when we'd spend, hours doing this. So I appreciate it.
There was no napkin safe.
Yes, that's right.
All right, my man. Well, God bless you and thank you.
All right. Thank you. We'll be in touch.
I hope so. Thanks, Adam.
All right. Bye.